Hello, you're very welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown, episode 78, the one before Livingston away. Celtic won 2-0 against St Mirren in midweek, 23 games unbeaten, a new record of the last couple of years, and improved performance from the last couple of games, it has to be said. It wasn't amazing, it didn't blow anybody away, but Celtic are still top of the table going into what is probably the most important fixture of the year because of the manner of which Celtic have struggled against Livingston over the last couple of years or so. Alan Morrison, aka Celtic by Numbers. Hello, how are you doing?
Hello. Yeah, hi Enda. Hi guys. Hi James.
And James is with us as well. James, how are you getting on?
I'm hanging in there. Feel like a beached whale. My lovely bride had her birthday yesterday, and I was gluttonous with dessert. So I might just roll over and fall off my chair here.
What kind of cake person are you? Are you an ice cream cake kind of person, chocolate cake?
Well, it wasn't about me, Enda. Don't be a narcissist. It was my wife's birthday. So I went to a local Italian place that got a dish of tiramisu, which she loves, and then also a cheesecake. So we didn't actually do a cake, so to speak, but yeah, got two options, and of course I had to have one of each.
And those cheesecakes are not low fat, are they?
Oh no,
in any shape or form.
No, this was dense, rich, and heavy, and yeah, probably about. And then I made a bacon wrapped beef brisket meal. So that was the entree. So yeah, I'm estimating my expected calories were about 9,000, I think, for the night, on top of a couple of lagers I had with it. So
yeah, well played.
No, can't complain with that. Classic American diet, if I want to throw that stone at you.
Oh, come on now. It was Italian.
Italian American.
Italian American. Yeah,
the worst of the worst.
Listen, there's tons of comments coming in on YouTube already, and if you're watching on YouTube, do drop us a comment, let us know what you thought of the game, and give us a few questions as well, and we'll try to get to some of them before the end of the show. We'll kick into things anyway. 2-0 Celtic. Cameron Carter-Vickers broke the deadlock, and then Callum McGregor getting the second to secure the win after Celtic had made a couple of substitutions and had sort of drawn St Mirren out from their shell. Look, this was, again, something that we've seen over the last couple of weeks, and I'm not saying whether it's right or wrong. It's to be expected with teams like St Mirren, who have the budget like St Mirren and the rest of them. This was a 7 men behind the ball at all times, backs to the walls, parking the bus, no attempt to win the game. Not saying that's a bad thing from St Mirren, but I'm saying is that it really stifles Celtic at times. So, Alan, I'll get your general thoughts on the game. Initially, this improved. This is an improvement from the last couple of games, but still not where we probably want Celtic to be.
No, I was kind of okay with it because, as I say, what I was worried about was that it was, I think, from you count the second half of the Aberdeen game, it was about 4.5 poor performances, poor team performances, irrespective of results. And as I've said many times before, more interested in performances. That's more predictive of future performances than results. Yeah, we had a bunch of bad performances in a row. That's a real worry as it's getting into the business end of the season. So I was actually okay with it. I thought it was a decent performance. And there's a lot of actually bits to be, optimistic about in that sense. I think we've got to accept the fact, like you said, that this is how teams are going to play against Celtic. It's not that it's completely new, but I think because obviously Postecoglou is very adamant that he's not going to change his approach to the game, it makes it even more likely that when opposition see that something works, they're going to go with that. So Hibs, like Hibs, 5 at the back. As soon as the wingers got it, because if you look at the goals and assists this season, the wingers are being prolific, right? So you double team those guys as soon as they get the ball. You had two holding midfielders. Like you had 7 defenders in the team, not 7 behind the ball, 7 defensive players in the team, and then two wide players that tried to get up and support one striker. That one striker kind of shuttled around, but pretty much let Carter-Vickers and Starfelt have the ball, and then the rest of the team are either man marked or they're surrounded in the land of the giants by lots and lots of players. With Hibs, it was they man marked the 2 number 8s, and it was a challenge to get them on the ball. St Mirren didn't man mark so much, but it was just really claustrophobic in that final third. So what did Celtic do better? I think they tried to put a lot quicker vertical passing into the game. There was a lot more early balls going forward, and then of course people get frustrated because you're giving the ball away a lot more. Well, listen, that's what happens, right? If you don't want to give the ball away, you just go around the shoehorn of futility, and you're going back and round all the time. You've got to try and put some more verticality in the passing. The second thing that was really noticeable was when we did get into wide positions, it was low flat crosses. We didn't put in too many aerial crosses, although Maeda had a little competition with himself, I think, to hit the corner flag from his headers in the first half. But generally speaking, we're trying to put in the ball low and flat and cutbacks. And again, think about Livingston coming up on Sunday. If you put high balls into the box, you don't need a big budget to buy players that are big and strong and can head the ball away. Any professional football team in the world can afford a player that does that. But if you put low flat crosses in, and then it becomes a contest of speed and thought and technique, and that's where having better players should make a difference. So it makes absolute sense to get the ball into the box low and flat and hard, and don't make it an arm wrestle in that sense. So those were the two sort of positives I took from it. I thought also what was really interesting was, so this is I'm going to risk incurring wrath from people who were, especially those at the ground, but I do feel the crowd got on the team's backs. There was a palpable tension around about the 33rd minute. It kicked off, and there was murmurings and grumblings, and every ball that kind of got lost, and this is a young team, right? And I know no one's going to feel sorry for Celtic, and rightly so, but there's not many players on that part that started that game that are seasoned in getting titles over the line. Okay, by and large, it's a young team, and they've not been down this path before. So I think we do need to stay with them. And it was very interesting when in the second half, when Bitton and Rogic came on, and suddenly you had a midfield of Bitton, Rogic, and McGregor, and then Forrest came on, and suddenly you have got a core of guys who've been down this path before. And I kind of thought, I can see how we could manage this now through the rest of the season. I can't, thinking about the combination of, like, Sunday, we're going to need speed, agility, quickness of thought, quickness of movement in midfield. But if we do get a goal ahead or 2 goals ahead or something, then you've suddenly got these options that suddenly are people who are not going to flap or panic if we're only 1-0 up with 20 minutes to go. They've been down this road before. So I think that aspect of the choices that we've now got really kind of hit home to me last night. And I took kind of comfort from that. So those were the 3 sort of positives that I took from what was, again, a difficult performance. But listen, you've got to give St Mirren credit for what they did. And this is going to be the way it is. So get used to it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Loads to unpack there. But James, I'll get your general thoughts on the performance from last night as well.
Yeah, I think I'll pull back a little bit and try and consider this within the context of big picture. So I in looking at all of the kind of performance data that I have dating back to season 15-16, and I focus obviously not that season, but subsequent seasons between Celtic and Rangers a lot for obvious reasons. There seems to be a seasonality component. And again, this goes back to my analytics background in financial markets, where people do all these kinds of studies with seasonality. And I think, there's a fairly consistent downturn in performance levels for both sides this time of year in seasons. I mean, it's a who knows if it's real or whether it's the statistical noise. But as someone who once lived for 6 weeks in Scotland from February into early March, and the type of weather that you're dealing with, the conditions you're living in, if you're not a local, so to speak, the lack of sunlight, lack of daylight, you look at these kinds of things that people have to deal with in life. And if you just think about it from a human level, and you have to go perform at work as an elite athlete, So I just wanted to mention that because I found that interesting looking back historically, is that there seems to be something potentially with that.
James, is it just to throw in a thought? Could it be that it's a function of the way that the Scottish League is structured, right? So we're in this pre-split stage, but we're getting to the end of that third round of fixtures, and one of the benefits of that split system is that virtually every team has still got a lot to play for. So there could be something around that. So because actually intuitively I would have thought this is the time of year when Celtic and the Rangers team, because of the squad size,
Right.
they'd be moving away from teams because injuries would start to impact other squads that they couldn't cope with. But actually, what's happening, and I agree with you, it might be something to do with the fact that all the teams are still in it. Now, when you get to the split, and then as people can't move any much further, then you might see some one-sided games. But at the moment, every game's live, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's, I think there's a lot of interesting, plausible theories as far as why it might be. One I have is, again, thinking it more from a human psychological perspective and mood is, when you have teams with a significant athletic advantage to other teams, um, if kind of social mood and mental health, let's call it, or the cyclicality of mood can compress that differential a little bit, meaning that what you normally have, if everyone's feeling good and playing at optimal levels, obviously, you're going to have, a performance advantage with better clubs. And, Celtic and Rangers tend to have more non-locals. So how many guys from places that they're not used to, it being only daylight from 9 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. and cloudy when it is sun, this quote unquote sun is up. So that's kind of my harebrained theory as far as why it might be a seasonal factor. I think yours is reasonable and interesting too. And there are probably some kind of combination of all this stuff, as well as, kind of cumulative fixture congestion and, fatigue that could be related to that. So I thought I'd mention that because it's probably not something a lot of people have discussed or thought about. As far as these specific games, I'm actually doing a study right now. I'm probably going to write an article about it on, the confluence of pitch size, how aggressive opponents are playing us. I mean, there's metrics that, particularly in StatsBomb, that gauges like how aggressively they're addressing our attackers, right? So when our attackers get the ball within 2 seconds, within 5 seconds, within 10 seconds, how aggressive our opponents in engaging us, and then what's the average defensive distance. So when are teams engaging us defensively? So, some of this can be thought about relative to parking the bus, right? So how advanced are teams getting? And then if you think about it from a spatial perspective, right, the bigger pitches, it's harder. If you're a Motherwell playing at Celtic Park and you're pressing high up the pitch, think about the compounding effects of how much space that creates. So what I've started to look at is there seems to be some pattern where you get teams that are, more passive and bunkering, and we are having trouble against that. And that's intuitive. The question is, the relative degree of passivity. So you get somebody like Livingston, their pitch is smaller, it's narrower, they're bunkering, and they're actually not as passive as, let's say, St Mirren was on the weekend. So they're using that smaller space to be a little bit more aggressive, whereas on a big pitch, I think, strategy-wise, some of the teams that are having more success against us are being even more passive, meaning that they're keeping, and if you think about it, they're keeping their shape, they're staying narrow, and they're not getting pulled out as much. So I think, and again, if you think about this intuitively, when we've got the better players, we've got the higher skill levels, anytime we're pulling teams out of their shape, that creates the ability for us to play these triangles and the 1-2s. Whereas if they stay disciplined and narrow, again, that's when you start seeing the number of crosses escalate. and you see the overall creative output tends to really drop. So that's kind of how analytically I've started thinking about this. And that's why I think Sunday will be interesting, because, it's like the microcosm of all of these difficult things that manifest in one game, including the pitch.
When we played Livingston away in the first game that we played this season at their place, they played quite an aggressive press. But when we played them at Celtic Park, they were really, really bunkered down into a very low block. Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So their average distance when they engaged was completely different between those two games. And again, we've talked about this before. I don't know what the legacy at Livingston is analytically, but the guy who was there is now at Man City. And so they've made some, they've been significantly outperforming their resources for a while now. And I think it's not completely, luck or just the manager being skilled or anything like that. I think they've been making some smart analytical choices as far as how they build their team relative to what their advantages are playing at the Macaroni. And then even going on the road, they tend to do things that are pretty smart and give themselves better chances to win, knowing that they don't have the best players and, those types of things.
Yeah. On your comment about the weather and mood and things, that kind of plays into an old football, I suppose, tripe, you could call it, in the sense of fair weather players. They're really good when the sun is shining, but can they do it when the rain is pouring down? Like, that's sort of a thing. It is a thing. I mean, it's nicer to play football in sunny weather that's dry. So winter weather is obviously tough in Scotland. There's a reason why players prefer London over Manchester and Newcastle and all these places in England. The weather is nicer. There's other things to do. But on the situation of space and pressing and how teams are setting up against this, I guess a lot of people who are watching this on TV would have been watching it on some sort of stream, probably the Celtic TV one. And I thought there was actually an interesting observation on it. There's not too often where I'm sitting watching Celtic TV and I think, whoa, that's actually that's a good spot there. But last night I think there was St Mirren were sitting back deep, and Starfelt saw a lot of the ball, as did Cameron Carter-Vickers and Juranovic, and a lot of it was on the halfway line, and all of our players were pushed forward. Juranovic was pushed forward, Greg Taylor was up, and as was Abada and Jota. And suddenly everything is so compact because you have essentially 21 players playing in one half. So there's not a lot of space to work with there. And one of the observations they made was, if our defense was maybe 5 yards further back, then the starting position of the entire team should be pulled about 5 yards further back. So there's more space to work into rather than trying to go into these corridors that are already packed full of players. And suddenly when you get the ball, you're static. There's nothing you can do because, there's no space to run into. And I just thought that was an interesting thought from, I can't remember whether it was Jerry McCulloch or the co-com who said it, but it definitely makes sense theoretically that if we pulled ourselves back a little bit, then we would have more space to work into rather than getting the ball in static, motionless positions with not a lot of space to work into.
Well, I think that depends on the strategy of the opponent, meaning that if they're just going to sit back and let you do that and not come out. And I think that's where there is some distinction here, what I've been trying to build this study, which is each team, a Motherwell for the most part is easier to pull out because they tend to not stay as narrow. And you can, pull guys width and also forward. Whereas, as Alan said, I mean, their striker yesterday was basically the only guy that was coming out beyond 40 yards. So it was very difficult to pull them out. And again, if I was them, like, this is what we talked about this in prior shows. I mean, to me, there's a fairly obvious strategy for opponents coming to Celtic Park in particular, if you're going to try and get anything out of a game. And again, maybe you hope to get one or two chances and you score on one or both of them, kind of like they did. I mean, they basically had two chances the whole game. One was the one that Hart came out and got, and another one was a good cross that no one was there for, that was like 7 yards out 8 yards out, that if someone had been there, could have been finished. But outside of that, and that's kind of the script, I think, for most of these bottom 6 teams, which is, you play for a draw, and if you get 1 or 2 chances that you can convert, or a corner or a set piece, then it's boring and it's not it's not entertaining. But to Alan's point, we were saying about the seasonality, when you're scrounging trying to get in the top 6, or you're trying to get out of relegation zone, or some of these other things, I mean, it's every point, particularly picking up a point at Celtic Park, can be a huge deal.
Big time. And it's not a one size fits all sort of thing as well, because I mean, Liverpool play an extremely high line, but they've got Virgil van Dijk to ping balls over the top really quickly and start an attack before St Mirren are back in position. But Celtic don't have that. In terms of the 2 defenders and their ball play, Alan, last night I thought Starfelt actually did quite well when he was in possession. He carried the ball out a bit more.
He did,
and was a bit more confident on the ball essentially than what we've seen from him.
Yeah, no, he did. And actually, it was another plus for me in general, Starfelt. But just on that point, he actually completed 21 passes by half time, which is incredible. 20 would be a lot for a 90-minute game. So, I mean, now these weren't like sort of expansive passes. These weren't taking out defenders. These were just getting past that initial press of, usually the press of 3, the winger and the striker, and maybe one of the midfielders at a push. So it was relatively conservative packing passes, but nevertheless, yeah, he did that really well. Carter Vickers actually only provided 3, but they were much more. They took a lot more players out of the game, because he does have that ability to play that inside right pass to the number 8 on that side, whereas most of Starfelt's passes are to the fullback or maybe McGregor, just taking out 1 or 2 players. But having said that, he at least got through that initial line and got the play moving very well. And in general, I think I've not really looked at his numbers recently, but I think his play, he looks a lot more safe, right? So what I suspect, if I look at his numbers, is that he's still losing. You think about back to the Hibs game, right? Hibs maybe had 3 moments of danger in the game, and I think I'm right in saying 2 of them came because Starfelt lost a headed duel. Okay, so it is, even for Celtic, you might not prioritise winning headed duels for the way we want to play. It's still important in being able to defend, and Starfelt will never be good in headed duels. I just don't, what he has cut out is individual errors. I think his error rate has gone way down. So I think he's just looking a lot more solid in that regard. But yeah, he was the main fulcrum in terms of getting that initial press. But then after that, it was a real struggle. You really were looking. I mean, actually, O'Reilly did create 4 chances in that half. He seems to have this habit of seeming to be quiet, and then you look at the data and you think actually he's done quite a lot of stuff at the pointy end of the pitch. He's had a couple of shots and he's created 4 chances. How did that happen? So, but in general, in both games, Hibs game and this game, we've struggled to get the creative players into the game. And poor old Hatate just looks like he needs to go and have a lie down. He looks so far off it. I don't know whether it's nerves, whether it's fatigue or what, but his timing's not there. Everything's just not. It's just not happening. He's not timing the ball properly. He's hitting it to where the player was 5 minutes ago or will be in 2 minutes. It's just not working for him at the moment. I don't know why that is. But then, as Ange said, a lot of these players have been here for 7 weeks. So what do we expect?
Yeah. The mistakes he's making screams fatigue to me in terms of just really simple, basic errors. I mean, there was one point where he had the ball on the halfway line and he went to do sort of a flick back to Cameron Carter-Vickers and just completely, mistimed the ball, didn't get anywhere near the player that he was trying, and nearly caused a St Mirren counterattack. But we'll see what happens. McGregor was pushed forward to number 8 with Bidon coming on. So again, that's interesting. You actually in your opening answer, there's about 7 or 8 different topics that I've sort of scribbled down to get to, but one of them that I want to get to is the general passing of the play, James. The passing is a split second too slow, in my opinion, when it comes to the final pass. And I think that's where we're struggling to break down these teams. I think we're actually creating loads of opportunities to get into the box and create chances, but then the pass comes too late and suddenly the pass is not on anymore. It happened a couple of times with Forest, and it's the overlap from the winger to the fullback where we're getting a player into the box and it just needs to be hit first time to them, and suddenly you've got a man in the box with a pullback or a low cross, but they take one extra touch, then suddenly there's two players in the way. The play breaks down. It's quite frustrating. And that really is just a case of moving the ball quicker. I think the team is doing what they're meant to be doing. I think that's what Ange is saying, but they just can't. They're not doing it quick enough, I guess, is the point I'm trying to make.
Yeah, I think that the speed with which the ball's moving has been an issue on the margin. I think we've kind of reverted back to decision making, particularly at the wing position, being less than optimal at times. So yeah, I looked at something. I think it was maybe Monday or Tuesday. But if you look at Abada and Jota's shooting this season, they've scored basically one goal from outside 18 yards on, like, I don't know, 52 shots, I think. And that was before yesterday. And, you know, the underlying data from their shooting is not great. Now, again, the sample size isn't massive. But when these guys are cutting in, particularly from an angled position and shooting through traffic, rather than recycling the ball or passing the ball and trying to, you know, make those more aggressive passes. And I think the flip side of that is our pressing and counter pressing, I think, has reverted back to being a bit uneven. And some of that has to do maybe with personnel again. You know, to Alan's point, Hatate has not looked great the last few games. So when he's been in there, and we're kind of back to the same spot with Abada and Jota, which is pressing is not, and counter pressing is not their strengths either. And that's reflected in their underlying defensive metrics. So you basically have a one-headed monster, and I mean that affectionately, running around like a lunatic and doing all kinds of good pressing. And the reason why that's important, and particularly with the context of counter pressing, is that when we're making these aggressive passes that aren't coming off, and they're not right now in any size, we're not doing a great job of winning the ball back in a way that's creating opportunities, right? So we're suffocating. So the structure is suffocating. The system is suffocating the opposition because the opposition isn't very good. So they're not good enough to be able to play out when we do that pressing, right? So we've seen that sliding scale with Bodo. So Bodo gave us a lot more problems because they have, you know, that higher level of player and coaching and system that they're playing. And as we move down domestically into these teams, they can't handle that when our system of pressing, but we're not creating enough because the people that are doing it, I think it's just not their strength. And so, you know, you get back to this issue of decision-making is not great. They're probably not great shooters from distance. At least that's what I've been able to ascertain so far. And when the creative passing isn't coming off, our counter pressing isn't really translating into really good opportunities. So that's, I think, why we're kind of getting bogged down against these bunkered teams, is because those different components aren't really working. And we don't have a 6'4" guy to lob the ball into.
Yeah, and there's a natural consequence. If you try and do things quicker, you're going to make more mistakes. Okay, right. So you know, if you try and get the ball forward quicker, you're going to be less accurate. You're testing people's technique to control it. It's going to be a bit more random as to where it precisely goes. And obviously, then if you're taking great care about your passing and probing and patiently waiting for the opposition to fall out of alignment. So we've got to accept the fact that as happened last night, there's going to be some, you know, what looks like poor play, poor technique, because you're trying to get the ball forward a bit quicker. You're trying to catch people off guard. You just gave the ball straight to the defender. Why did you do that? Well, in a split second, I thought I could just get it through that needle to Maeda's run. You know, there's going to be a lot of that, right? So this is, you're going to have to accept that that's the trade-off between having a patient approach and having a more aggressive passing approach.
Yeah. To your point about the fans and getting on the back, though, I think fans are less likely to get frustrated by an attacking risky pass that goes astray than some of the things that happened last night where they got the ball and instead of going for the forward pass, there was a turn back and let's start the attack again. I think that's where a lot of the frustration came, was when Celtic slowed the ball down, and you just know that St Mirren are just going to get their 9-man behind the ball now into the space that they want. So it is a double-edged sword in a way, like you're saying. These riskier passes have a lower percentage in completion, but they also it's a risk benefit thing where you're going to
I suppose my not annoyance, that was not the right word, but I suppose my own frustration at people being frustrated at the team came from the fact that I just didn't think it was appropriate, and I don't think it's appropriate because of the unbeaten record that they're on in the league, the fact that they're top of the league, and the fact it's such
it's not Neil Lennon's Celtic.
It's clearly such a young team, and they're clearly trying to play a certain way and have been reasonably successful doing it. So I just don't think they deserve to have people on their back, really. That was where I was coming from. But the other point I wanted to make is, in terms of quid pro quo that we probably don't speak about enough, is that if we are, and it looks like we are, forcing teams to really into this low block, and actually our own expected goals as a team in the 5 performances that I mentioned has absolutely crashed. Whilst when we were creating over 2.5 xG a game, that to me has got enough fat in it that you're probably going to win. You're probably going to score a couple of goals every game. And that's probably going to be enough to win most games, right? But once you've dropped down to 1.5, then are you really? If you might not score in one game and then you lose one at the other end. But what is happening is that although we are not creating as many chances, and it is more difficult for Celtic to create, and more teams have got this deep low block, we're really hard to play against as well, and we're not giving up hardly any chances at all, and we still haven't conceded in the last 20 minutes of any game in the SPFL, and that is really hard for other teams. It's very tough to play like St Mirren did physically, and to then have the energy to make the most of your opportunities. Now, we know that it does happen. We saw Dundee score with 2 chances from 2 set pieces. It does happen, as did Aberdeen similarly. So, there's always still risk there, but we are, well, as much as it's looking a little bit turgid for us trying to score, we're horrible to play against for the opposition as well, and we're not giving them much to go on.
Yeah,
it's a long way up the pitch.
I had a question for you, Ange, so that or get your feedback on how I kind of conceptualize this, which is I think of Ange ball now that we were almost 9 months into it. It's very much a it's these wide overloads and the getting those triangles and making those runs into the half space and wide, and then looking for those pullback crosses and so basically get deep inside the opponent's 18, not in the box, but within 18 yards of the goal, usually a little wider than that, or maybe slightly inside in that half space, and then cutting it back. Whereas, like a Red Bull, their philosophy is narrow, central. Their overloads are central and then hyper counter pressing. And in my mind, just intuitively, the way to go against Ange ball is what these teams are starting to do, which is these, like you said, 5-3-2, double the wingers. But, if they're going to be really wide, let them out there. If they want to lump the cross in, go ahead. But if they start entering that danger zone of cutback crosses, and you're crowding the central part of the box with the defensive midfielders, I mean, again, these teams aren't all complete idiots. They're starting to suss this out a little bit, I think. And the question is, what do we do about it?
I mean, Hibs was a great example. If you actually wanted to do an academic study on how to counter Ange ball, the way Hibs set up is actually perfect, almost. I mean, I questioned it a little bit because they gave themselves virtually no chance to win the game. But if you just concentrated on how to set up a team defensively, not offensively, just defensively, to counter the way that Celtic play, it would be to do precisely what Maloney did, which is to double up on the wingers, to man mark the central midfielders, and then to compress the space in that way.
Yeah, And if you're a team like Hibs, and not to get dragged into a conversation about other teams, but if you think about the Scottish League in the sense of Celtic and Rangers, if you're Celtic, if you beat Rangers twice in the year, you're likely going to win the league. Likewise, if you're a team like Hibs, if you don't lose to Celtic and Rangers rather than beating them, likelihood is the teams that you're competing with for that, third or fourth place position are going to lose, and that's where you can get your sort of advantage. I think it should be said as well about how far this team has come from last year, because I was just looking at the table, and at the end of the season last year, Celtic had 77 points. They'd scored 78 goals and they'd conceded a whopping 29 goals in the final game of the season, final table. So that's 38 games, 78 goals scored, 29 goals conceded, 77 points. At the minute, Celtic, with 9 games left to play in this season, are on 70 points. They've scored 62 and they've only conceded 17. So we're in a much, much better position than we were this time last year. So I think that's where, maybe context is everything to performances. And if the fans are getting frustrated right enough, you're at the game, you want Celtic to score, but just think about where we were this time last year and maybe take yourself back a little bit. Just before we finish up on this game, maybe look ahead to the weekend. One final question for the creative side of things. What do we do to get Daisen Maeda into the game more?
In the first half, right, he touched the ball 4 times and they were all shots on goal. He didn't complete a single pass, and he had 4. He touched the ball 4 times in the box, and they were all attempts at goal. Now there were headers, and they didn't look like good chances, but actually by most XG models, there were decent chances. Decent chance. I mean, one was inside the 6-yard box actually. So there's a deeper study to be done. I'm not sure it's a Maeda thing. The way that Celtic set up, the strikers just don't get involved hardly. I mean, and this notion of having more shots than passes is actually coming to fruition. I used to joke about Lee Griffiths like that, but actually Lee Griffiths was like a Zidane compared to the way strikers play under this system. So I wouldn't be worried about it, but people will worry if on such little possession the striker doesn't score. Then the question is, well, what are they doing? What are they contributing? And that's, with him, it comes back to the pressing and the stretching of defenders, moving people out of position, constant movement. Somebody made, again, actually there were a few good comments from Stan Petrov on the Celtic TV coverage last night, and somebody else made, I think it was Tom Boyd, made quite an interesting comment about Maeda, where he said, "I wish sometimes he would just stand still." And I used to play as a striker, and what he meant by that was, sometimes when you stand still, everybody else moves away from you, and it's almost like that. There's a little bit of that craft, that striker craft, that maybe he needs to learn. It's obviously a badge of honor for him, and his, where if he's not going to be linking the play and he's not going to be contributing to build up, then he's thinking, well, I'm chasing people down, I'm moving people out of position, I'm battering into people, I'm winning the odd challenge and getting the ball back high and all this sort of stuff. But actually, I think it's a bit of craft that he's missing in his play, which he's still a relatively young striker, so hopefully that will come.
Yeah, so Alan had pointed out the dynamics relative to the striker position in Ange's system, even back when Kyogo was fit and fully firing and playing so tremendously. He wasn't on the ball much. It was more quality over quantity. So when I looked at I'll other people that had scouted Maeda, or just kind of the reports on Maeda out of the J League, some people that I read, J League analysts, that kind of stuff, was that he's not great on the ball. Like, that's out of all his skill set. He's more of a finisher. He's not someone that's going to carry the ball 20, 30, he's not a Jota. He's not going to carry the ball 30 yards and then have a dynamic 1v1 interaction with a defender, beat them, and then, do something after that. He's more making these runs. And if you think about that, again, within the context of Ange's system, Ange needs somebody on the end of those cutback crosses to finish, right? So that's what Kyogo was doing so tremendously well before he got hurt. The big difference so far is that Maeda has not been finishing very well. And I think that'll change. I mean, I think that's so far it's just normal variance. And the flip side of that, I think why people are kind of calling for Giakoumakis is probably because he's finished better. But again, if you look at the depth of his career, he's not, what I would consider an elite finisher. I mean, he pretty much scores the amount of goals he probably should, and he's scored a little more than he probably should so far. So, again, these things will vary depending on how things just kind of swing. So I think Maeda's probably due. He'll probably start scoring a little bit here. But the other part of this is that neither Maeda nor Giakoumakis, their passing related metrics, their carrying related metrics, pretty much anything on the ball outside of scoring is very good at all. It's been really poor, actually. That's where Kyogo's different. Kyogo offers those extra things that those two do not. And as Alan said, the one thing that Maeda offers that Giakoumakis even doesn't. I mean, Giakoumakis literally so far has just been, he's shot well. He's finished. Yeah, he's gotten in positions, not much more than what the other strikers have. So again, I would chalk that up more so to the system working correctly. And to his credit, he's doing well within the system, what he should be doing, and he's been finishing. But pretty much outside of that, anything else he's doing on the ball, whether it's holding up and then passing, taking the ball and trying to carry it and beat somebody, or even his pressing has not been great. His defensive activity, he's trying, but he's not being that effective in doing it. Whereas Maeda is at least offering that value as far as on the pressing side. So I get the obvious inclination going into Sundays. People are going to say, "Oh, bring Giakoumakis in. We need somebody to, because of the compressed game and all that stuff." And I think that's a dual-edged sword. I don't have a strong, opinion on one or the other. You could play both, like we did. I forget which game it was, where Maeda was out to the left and Jota was out right. And that's actually probably what I would lean more towards. Is if I was going to drop somebody, it'd probably be Abada. But so I just want to raise that we're trying to replace Kyogo right now with two people that have different skill sets and are pretty deficient in the area. If they do get on the ball much, it's usually not turning into a good outcome. So it's almost like we don't want them on the ball.
Can I just give you their XG and goals numbers? Because I think you'll be surprised based on what you've just said.
Yep.
So okay. So let's take Kyogo first of all. Okay, he's scoring 0.78 goals per 90 minutes, but his XG, his non-penalty XG, is only 0.57. Okay, Maeda is scoring 0.5 goals per 90 minutes, so a goal every other game, and his XG is actually 0.44. Okay, Giakoumakis is scoring 1.13 goals per 90 minutes, and his XG is 1.18. It's double the other two. His XG is double, and he's now played more than 10 games worth of 90 minutes. He's now past the 900-minute benchmark. So he's got double the XG of the other two strikers. So based on that form, you'd have him in the team, because they're quite impressive numbers, right?
The one argument I would make on behalf of Maeda against Livingston this weekend, if we were to turn to this weekend, is the natural inclination against a team like Livingston is to put a Giakoumakis in, and I can completely understand the argument of why you would, but then you're getting sucked into what Livingston want you to do. I mean, Livingston want a big guy up front against them because they know how to defend against that. That's their bread and butter. If you have a guy like Giakoumakis in the box, you're more inclined to play more crosses in. You're more inclined to try to get the ball into him or play hold up play. And that's what Livingston, that's what they live for, essentially. So that's the one argument I would make against Giakoumakis this weekend, although I would be putting him into the team for this weekend.
Yeah, but if you're putting him into the team and you're firing low, hard balls at him, his movement and finishing are excellent. So you don't want him having an arm wrestle with their big centre halves. But you do want to give him a chance to attack low, hard crosses.
Yeah, for sure. So What are we thinking then this weekend in the the Tony Macaroni Arena, or I don't know what you want to call it. It's the toughest stadium that we seem to go to at this point in the season.
It's just Livingston.
Are we expecting, like, I genuinely think if Celtic go in and score early, game done, Livingston will not trouble Celtic whatsoever. Although they have sprung up to 4th in the table, which is just bizarre.
But they got the same number of points as Hibs and Dundee United. Basically, it's like playing Hibs and Dundee United, right? They're the same number of points. Yeah. So tough game. Absolutely going to be a
tough game. I think if Celtic scored early, Celtic will win the game easily. But the longer it goes on, the more difficult it becomes. That's not very profound, but that's essentially how I see the game going.
Yeah, I think it's one of those games where the bounce of the ball is we got a couple of good bounces yesterday, which was welcome developments, and that seems to be something that's compounded on that pitch. And I think, again, with all the diving into keeper related analytics I've been doing in the last few months, one of the things that their keeper stands out is I think he's a pretty good long kicker, like Alnwick was yesterday, meaning that they when they have the time to do it, meaning that, Maeda was giving Alnwick some headaches yesterday and rushing him some, understandably. But when they seem to have the time to do it, they can place the ball where they are trying to more than they don't. And the thing about Livingston is that they can leverage that because they're not, they're smart enough to not go challenge for balls they're not going to win. So they play, they'll let a Starfelt or more so a Carter Vickers win the ball and play for second balls, right? So instead of having one of their guys go up and lose a header, they compete for something, they'll drop off. So you'll notice that probably.
Cluj, it's like Cluj. That was
exactly. It's play for second balls. Don't even try to really attack that first one. Unless your probabilities, unless it's Greg Taylor versus somebody or maybe Starfelt. So they'll be smart about that, I think. They have a keeper that can put the ball where they're probably going to try and do it. And then it's chaos, right? It's where does the ball bounce? And, so that's their kind of recipe, I think, is when they do get those opportunities to get the ball forward, win those second balls, create chaos. And they are, at their level, pretty reasonable at pinging the ball around on that pitch and getting crosses into the box. So, it's really going to be interesting. Now, having said that, we did mention it earlier. They have been more aggressive against us at home. So hopefully that creates a little more room, a little more space potentially, and creases for guys like O'Reilly, and depending on who plays, I'm assuming O'Reilly plays. Who else plays in midfield to maybe make some of those carving passes. But yeah, I mean, what do they say about the definition of insanity? I mean, at what point do we just know going into this game that it's not going to be a beautiful thing, and it's probably going to be a bit of a struggle.
So I mean, I looked at that game again, that 1-0 loss. And just a few contextual things, because as always, context is important, and we tend to just focus on the result and not those contextual points, get lost in the mist of time. So that game came off the back of the 4-3 match in Betis, in Seville, against Real Betis, which was arguably the most exhausting game Celtic have played this season. It was not only was it played in pretty hot conditions, it was just a high pressing, attacking, end-to-end, exhausting affair. Absolutely thrilling football match. And we played them on the back of that game. That was on the Thursday, and played them on the Sunday. We had a midfield of McCarthy, Turnbull, and Rogic, and a Yeti up front. And if you want a midfield and a striker that is the antithesis of Ange ball, that would be pretty close. And what do I mean by that? I mean just the energy, the ability to move the ball quickly, the counter pressing capability. That is not a good core of 4 players to have in the centre of the pitch. And what happened was that they didn't stick a big lad up front. put Graham Shinney up front, or one of the Andrew Shinney up front, who's actually a midfielder by trade, and they packed the midfield with small, quick, athletic players, and they just chased after Celtic all game. And those 4 players that I've mentioned, one of their common characteristics is they're not quick. They're not quick to turn on the ball. They're relatively slow players. They're not moving quickly, and that was what was really noticeable. On the combination of the pitch and the pressing intensity meant that Celtic's midfield just couldn't get their heads up, couldn't get the forward pass out quick enough. So the lesson from me from that is that we pretty much go with what we started with last night. You put Hatate back in, you put O'Reilly back in, you have McGregor, and you move the ball quicker. And it's going to be completely different midfield to what we played when we lost there earlier in the season. I don't think the home game that was a draw will teach us as much, because it's on a different pitch, and as I say, they bunkered in, which I don't think they'll do on Sunday. And also we played a midfield there of Bitton, McGregor and Turnbull, and Bitton did not once go beyond the number 8s. So he was just sitting there. It was a waste of a shirt, effectively. I don't see us repeating that mistake. So, but if you look at other games against teams where we've had 30 touches in the box, 10 shots inside the box, we've generally won these games. We beat Motherwell 2-0, St Johnstone 2-1, Ross County 2-0. We've generally won those games. If we can create the same attacking output as we have done in those 2 games with that better balanced and capable midfield that I've mentioned, then we're miles ahead of where we were at that point in terms of cohesion and team identity and the way of playing. So I'm not being complacent. I'm just saying that's the context. This is where we are today. Yes, it could all go tits. Yes, they could score from 1 or 2 free kicks. Absolutely, but it's just Livingston, mate.
Yeah, it's my concern, my anxiety is more so I think there's a pretty good chance they'll score at least a goal, right? So then
they've lost 6 home games, by the way, in the league this season.
Yep,
more than they've won.
Yep. But again, they play differently against some of these other teams, and that's I get concerned that the likelihood is, or the higher likelihood than you might think that they'll score, and then that means we probably have to score 2, and that's where I get back to the I get more nervous. Is can we score 2 there? And of course we can, but it's do we create enough chances where the probability of that's really high? I think that's where the anxiety comes in.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hope so. Let's hope so.
Absolutely.
I'm not gonna say that I'm looking forward to a good performance, because every time I do that, we just seem to play absolutely cat. So I'm gonna say I'm looking forward to watching Celtic play football. That's all I'm gonna say going into this game. That'll do us, I think, for the Huddle Breakdown this week. Look, loads of comments coming in on the YouTube channel. Sorry we didn't get to all of them, but I have a life of my own and I have to get out to training. So I promise you we will do a Q&A sometime soon when we get a chance, and there's a bit of a relief in the season where we get a chance to answer more of your questions. If you want to get the podcast, we're available on Spotify and on iTunes and wherever you get your podcast, or you can get us here on YouTube as well on the Breakdown Inc. YouTube channel. Just hit the subscribe button below. Alan, James, thanks again.
Thanks, guys. Have a good week.
All right, we'll chat to you next week. Good luck.